Well, good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here. My name is Clint Walker. As said, I am with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency underneath the Department of Homeland Security umbrella. Just so you know, those little lines that appear across my face and stuff, that is a part of my camera system here on this computer. So it is not your computer, it is mine. But I hope everybody's having a great day. And I just want to say that, as we do these cybersecurity speaking events and things like that, our main focus really is to say, how can we add value? How can we either raise your awareness of something? But there seems to be a trend going on. There's just a lot happening in the world, and everything happening in the world is kind of coming back to, you have to respond in some way, shape, or form. And so what I thought would be fun for us to do today is, I know a tabletop exercise is usually a lot of discussion, but I want to run you through kind of a rhetorical tabletop exercise where I'm just going to show you kind of, all these different things that have happened. These all come from real events. These are all come from real incidents that we have responded to. Now, this all didn't happen to one person. That would be a really bad time. But I want to show you kind of how things evolve or how things go. And have you really thought through your incident response or incident management plan as you go through this? But before I do that, I really want to start with this. How many of you remember this old adage, for want of a nail, the shoe was lost? And the shoe lost the horse, you lost the rider, without the rider, you lost the message, without the message, you lost the battle, and without the battle, you lost the kingdom, all for the want of a nail. I grew up listening to that, and, it was one of the favorites of my, family to always talk about and discuss how the little things can be very important. And so I really wanted to update that for today's world. And so I did. And we look at it from this aspect, is that we're trying to secure something, and that security is data. And that's what the world revolves around right now, is data. And for want of the data, the asset was lost. For want of the asset, the process was lost. Without the process, we lost the system. Without the system, we lost the operation. Without operations, we lost services. And without services, we had no mission, all for the want of the data. Do you really know what your data is? Do you know what the crown jewels, what are you really trying to protect? Is it something in the computers? Is it something in somebody's head? If somebody retires and walks out the door with all the knowledge they have in their head, does your business operations stay the same? Are you handicapped in some way, shape, or form? Do you have documentation to support what you're going to do? And that's what we're going to talk about through all of this, is we're going to kind of show you all the different scenarios that kind of pop up. But before we get into that, I just want to talk a little bit about what CISA is, just real fast. I have to do this. So we are the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. We are the nation's risk advisor. Just as my title states, I'm a cybersecurity advisor. I am here to give you advice. I am a no-cost resource for you, or all the different CSAs that are spread throughout the country. We are here to give you advice on your cybersecurity program, help you figure out your strategic and tactical level plans to get to where you need to be, to help you assess where you are now and where you would like to be. We're going to help you build those bridges with other relationships, with other agencies, with other partners, to make sure that you have the tools and access to people that you need to get where you're going. And so with that being said, this is what today's threat landscape looks like. Think about all of this. Is a lot of people didn't realize that pandemics was even on this list until, COVID hit. Think about how COVID really impacted us. Having worked for the Department of Health and Human Services, of course, pandemics were always on our, mind. We actually practiced them as part of our cyber drills, because if we had something got out in a lab somewhere, and we still need to do cybersecurity, how were we going to do it if we didn't have access to that building? We actually had a building that had a gas leak in it, which, made people sick. How did we, make sure that we could still do, cybersecurity or even physical security if you didn't have access to that facility or to that campus? But we always deal with, I'm in Region 4, which is the East Coast. So we're always dealing with extreme weather events, whether they be hurricanes or tornadoes. But you have acts of terrorism. That's a real focus right now, especially with everything going on in the world with Ukraine and everything else that's happening, is that we always have that fear that, of terrorism, whether it be a physical terrorism or kinetic attack, or whether it be a cyber attack because of terrorism. And then, of course, we're always worried about insider threat. And that's the insider threat. That's the actually malicious insider, but then there's also the inadvertent insider. So people who just don't want to follow your security processes, people who haven't been trained, or people who just refuse to actually do it because they want to do their job. They're going to click on that link or open that attachment or bypass the security control just to make their job easier or more convenient. And then, of course, accidents and technical failures happen all the time, misconfigurations, the power going out because somebody hit a pole somewhere, with a car. all of these things happen. So we have all of these different threats out there. And the one thing that everything covers in these threats is that you need to be able to respond to them. And then when we look at things, let's focus in on the cyber threats for just a moment, is we have everything these days from ransomware, things that are going to deny you access to your asset. They're going to keep you from being able to do things on your devices. But you still have malware, self-propagating malware that's getting out there. You have things that are trying to get into systems. You have advanced persistent threats. You have supply chain threats. So you have all these different cyber threats coming in. All of them require a different response from you internally and through your operational plans. And so you need to keep that in mind as we're moving through things. Because the threat actors are actually trying to get in. They're doing their reconnaissance because we put so much information out there. You're trying to attract customers or people to use your services. And in doing so, you're giving out the information that you might need to help protect, or that would be good to protect your networks. And so the threat actors are using all this information. They know that Mary in accounting is the one that's going to process any bills that come in. They're using spear phishing attempts. They know that who has access to what. They're getting all of this. They know that if you're going to have a food truck Friday coming up, that's a good time to send out phishing or spam emails to you in order to get people to click on a link that says, hey, if you want to order your food early to avoid the rush, click here and you can order your food early because you put something out on Facebook that says we're having Food Truck Friday. So the bad guys like to get in, use this reconnaissance to have their initial compromise. If they can get legitimate access using somebody's username and account, that's what they're going to go for. But then they're going to escalate their permissions and then move laterally throughout your network. And that's really what we're looking at, is they're not just attacking you directly. They're coming at you from everybody that you do business with. That's supply chain threat. They're saying that, hey, your target organization might have really good cybersecurity programs. You might have great practices, but you know what? You might have a direct connection to an infrastructure provider or to a supplier, or you might be expecting an invoice from a vendor. So if I can hack into that vendor and attach my malware to their invoice so that when you open it up, it detonates and I get into your organization now. That's what they're doing, especially the more technical threat actors or the nation states. They're looking what I call 7 degrees downstream, or the Kevin Bacon attack. And they're going to attack somebody that's downstream from you and then use those systems to worm their way or island hop their way up in order to get to you. So a lot of people always say, I'm a small or medium-sized business. I'm not really a target. You are a target because of who you do business with or who you might have access to in order to move upstream or to attack a larger fish. So always keep that in mind. Because that's what we're looking at, is that these staging targets, the threat actors are going after these small and medium-sized businesses. They're going after small widget suppliers or people who offer a service, whether it be, custodial engineering services or, things like that. They're going after these companies because they know that you do business with those organizations. Some traffic is expected, or you might just have US-based IP addresses, because a lot of organizations might do blocking or filtering based on national, on nation states. And so if they can compromise a company that already has IPs in the United States, they can use those computers then to attack everybody else. One of my favorite actual tabletops that I ever was part of was actually the Secret Service, where the whole tabletop exercise starts with them saying, hey, we're knocking on your door saying, hey, we found your information, all your, crown jewels, all your protected data. And it was on this other company's computers. As we were doing an investigation for them, we found all your data. How did it get there? So you have no indicators of compromise. You don't know if you have an insider threat. You don't know if you've been compromised by a threat actor out there, or did somebody do some dumpster diving. You don't know how the information got there, but yet you still have to respond to this incident. How would you do it? So that's always an exciting way to start a tabletop exercise, is that you don't have anything to go with, but you still have to respond. And what would you do in order to do it, especially to help another investigation? And that's where we come to the beginning of this, is that you really have to look at, there's 3 parts to any incident management plan. You have incident response, which is what most people think of when you're talking about incident management, is how do I respond to the incident that's going on? But on the other hand, from an operational standpoint, you want to be able to continue to do business even while you're responding to the events. You have business continuity. And then you need to prepare for the worst and say, how am I going to recover for this? So how can I start to recover even as I'm responding and even as I'm continuing business? Do I need to move to an alternate data center? Or if I move to my alternate site, how am I going to start to come back from it when things start to clear up? So you have these 3 separate programs that all work together to be your incident management program. And so each one is a separate discipline. Each one might have different players to it, but you should really look at things closely, saying, can one person ever be part of all 3 of these? because then you start to have a bottleneck. How can I be responding to the incident if I'm also trying to keep the business up and running, or if I'm trying to, recover us from a disaster? It really needs to look at it as 3 separate teams and how they're going to communicate and coordinate and work together. And that's what you need to look at too, is your incident response plan, is it a site plan? Are you just trying to protect a single site? Or are you trying to protect a single business operation or a single system? Or are you just responding to a specific event? Or is it a combination of the 3? Are you saying that, hey, this site which holds this system is going to have a malware or have a ransomware incident response plan? How specific do you want to get? How much do your playbooks want to be generic, or how much do they want to be very tailored down, saying, hey, a denial of service against this system is going to have this response? So you have the event and the system, but you might say, hey, we're going to have a site response. Our data center is going to have its own incident response plan on how to deal with power outages or extreme weather events. So you have to look at all these things and say, what type of response plan works best for me and works best for our business operations? I'm going to go back to this slide just real fast. So you see that we use kind of this OODA loop here as you're looking at things, is that really, incident management comes from, 4 key categories: that you're detecting something is happening, you're analyzing it and triaging, and then you're responding and recovering, and then you're having that feedback loop and you're making the process better by improving capabilities. So we're going to kind of run through all these sections really quickly, because normally this session takes a much longer time, and I apologize for that, but I really think that you really need to go through this. But let's just talk about detecting and analyzing here real quick. Let's say that the Department of Homeland Security, or CISA, we release a new ransomware variant called Ragnarok. So we have all this information, we get it out to you, we're trying to make it as actionable as possible. And we're saying that it's targeting state and local governments as well as the financial and healthcare sectors. Then let's say the MSISAC or the FBI releases that there's actually a threat actor, HR Pwn, that is looking to weaponize this Ragnarok variant. So they're taking this new variant and they're saying, hey, we're going to actually attack these sectors with it. So the first question we have for you is, does your organization receive any of this information? Who are you getting your vulnerability information from, and who are you getting your threat information from? And yes, they're 2 totally separate things. One is that there's a vulnerability out there, something that can be used in order to compromise the system. The other is there a threat actor actively using it, or are there bad people actually trying to do this? So one is vulnerability, one is threat. How are you taking this information internally? How are you distributing it? How are you racking and stacking it, prioritizing it? I get a lot of organizations that raise their hands and say, oh yeah, I get all those alerts. I'm getting everything from US CERT and from CISA and from MSISAC or the FSISAC or the HISAC. I get all this information coming from InfraGard. And then I say, okay, how often are you processing it? And they're like, well, what do you mean processing it? I was like, how often is somebody reading it and say, does this pertain to our organization? Do we need to take immediate action, or is this just a nice to know? Does this elevate our patch? If we patch every Friday, do we start to do an emergency patch? How does it, go into our change management program? What information or what, actions is your organization taking based on this information coming in? And a lot of organizations say, you know what, those vulnerability alerts come out every day, all day. If I started to say, hey, I'm going to take action on every single one, I'd never get anything else done. And that's what you have to realize is, when would you know, just because something is out there, that it's actionable to your organization? Do you do an actual in-depth look at it and say, how would this impact us if somebody was to use this? And then what information are you sharing to the people, to your stakeholders or to your business partners? So your vendors, your suppliers, your infrastructure providers, are you talking to them cooperatively to say, are we at risk here, or are you at risk because, hey, power company, if you go down, then I have to switch to my backup generators and I need to prepare for that ahead of time if you think that you're susceptible. So how far down the rabbit hole are you going and looking at who's vulnerable to what just came out? Are you having open discussions in your immediate area in order to see what the real threat to your organization is? And that being said, let's move on to day 15. Day 15, let's say the news starts saying that somebody close to you, maybe a neighboring city or somebody else in your industry, has been hit with this stuff. They're suffering network outages and they're impacting several services that they have. So number one, does that raise any flags with you? If somebody else in your industry or somebody else that's close to you, maybe even somebody in your supply chain gets hit, do you start to take a look at things internally? Does that elevate or raise to a level of awareness? Should I take more action on this particular vulnerability or this particular threat? Are you starting to talk with people? How would you reach out? So if the other organization, let's say they're part of your supply chain, if they are actually having problems, how would you reach out and coordinate with them if they're in incident response mode? Are you part of their prioritization for communication, or are you just going to be put in the queue, say, hey, we'll give you information when we're done dealing with whatever we have. Meanwhile, you're wondering, hey, am I vulnerable to this? Is there anything else? Should I not open any attachments from you? Should I cut a direct connection that we have? How does that impact your own incident response plan? Now, let's say that you also have, maybe an open records request system, or you have a sales system, or you have something where, people, maybe they're contacting HR for more information about the company. How would you discover if somebody's doing reconnaissance? And not just the typical reconnaissance, oh, somebody's doing a ping sweep on me, or somebody's looking for open ports or protocols. But what if somebody's doing some social engineering? Is there any feedback from HR or from customer relations for anybody to tell you, hey, somebody's calling up and asking, hey, who they should send invoices to, or how do we do payments, or what vendors do we use internally, so they might be able to offer us sales or services? How do you know when somebody's doing some reconnaissance to you? How do you know if are you tracking across multiple platforms? Hey, this person is asking questions on Facebook, but he's also over here asking different questions on our LinkedIn account, and he's over here maybe on our Twitter feed, doing things or making comments, but he's really trying to figure out who does what. It looks like he's trying to bring in information about how we do business. Does any of that elevate your, threat protocol? Are you starting to communicate internally about, do we really have a problem? Is somebody targeting us with something? So let's move on, like at day 20, so you start to get phishing and spear phishing emails. So let's say they're going to specific departments in your organization. So how many of you have a way for people to report phishing? And do people actually report phishing, And does your phishing department, or whoever's looking at this mailbox that everybody's sending all these phishing things to, they actually look at it and say, hey, are we being targeted? Is this just a normal phishing email, like something that every company's getting? Or is this something that's actually something targeted directly to us? Is somebody using terminology that we use internally? Is somebody targeting somebody that is critical to our operations with something? Does that start to elevate? Does that get back to the security office or the operations team to start saying, hey, we need to, bring things up to DEFCON, a little higher, just to make sure that we're focusing on these things? And what if they start, actually talking about real events that you're holding? You have a conference coming up, or somebody's making some travel, and it starts to reference those things. Does this really elevate? How would you tell if somebody reports a phishing email that has a link on it? Do you do a sweep of all your other email accounts to make sure that email isn't somewhere else in your network? And did somebody else actually click on it? Are you calling the users up saying, hey, I see that you received this email, that you opened it, 3 days ago. Did you click on anything, and did you open the attachment? How are you actually doing follow through if you do notice something suspicious in one email? Are you looking through the rest of your network to see what else might have happened with that email? Are there similar emails coming in? Are you talking or training the people who got those emails, especially the ones who didn't report it? So the one who did report it, are you giving them a high five, or are you talking to the people who didn't report it saying, hey, why didn't you report this? Or, what caused you not to, think that this was a good thing to do? So just how are you actually doing this? And then are you elevating that up to higher management so they can start to say, hey, maybe there's something bigger going on here. We need to start looking more. Maybe we need to turn some of our security tools up, or start to filter through our logs a little bit more to make sure that something isn't happening. So let's say that now your help desk team starts to receive, increased calls from staff reporting they've lost control of their mouse, or random applications are opening on their computer. Help desk, this actually comes from a real event too. So the help desk just says, hey, because what's the help desk there for? The help desk is there to get users back up and able to do their job, right? So they say, hey, rebooting the computer gave, control of the mouse back to them, and the application stopped opening. So we're going to close the ticket. Everything's done. Is there a link between your help desk and your cybersecurity program to say, hey, we think there's more to this person's computer, having an issue than just what the remediation that we did? Yes, the user is back up and able to do their job, but is there any other forensics, or is there any other investigation that needs to be done to say that we might have an incident? How would that be elevated? How would that then take priority? Would your security team even look at it and say, hey, I think this is worth looking into? Or how would you know what's going on? And then let's talk about, once again, I know I'm picking on human resources a little bit, but human resources, accounts payable, these groups, they get a large amount of emails coming in, and the emails that they get coming in, they have to open attachments. They have to open links or click on links. They have a lot of this stuff coming in. So let's imagine that your human resources start getting, emails from what looks to be like recruiters or people that, they do business with. Maybe it's a trust, How would you know if one of your recruiter's email account was compromised and somebody was sending you malicious attachments? Do you have special considerations for your HR department or your accounts payable department? Are they opening emails in a virtual machine so that if they detonate, the virtual machine just collapses and goes away? Or what controls do you have? Do you have additional screening on their machines because they are more susceptible to these things? And then what is the communication chain for them to let you know, hey, I got something in, I clicked on it, or I was expecting a resume to be in here, and when I opened the attachment, nothing happened. It was a blank attachment, or the name on the attachment didn't match what the recruiter was sending me. Things just didn't look right. Would your security office even have the time or even, look at that and say, hey, maybe we need to pull this over and us do some investigation on the account or the attachment that was sent or the link that the person clicked on? Would that even elevate or rise? Is there a communication chain between those different departments back to your security team to say, we think this needs investigation? And then my favorite when I used to do pen testing was always leaving the USB drives around. That's always a fun one, especially if you put something like, company payroll on there, or you say that it's safety concerns. No matter what the thing that's written on the thumb drive or anything like that, people are most likely going to plug in a thumb drive and open it up. Now, hopefully we've come to the stage where everybody's been trained not to do that. But I have to be realistic and say that I talk to a lot of companies and they say, yes, people still stick thumb drives in. Do you have any controls around external media, whether it be CD-ROMs, whether it be thumb drives, whether it be external hard drives? Do you know when they're plugged in? Would you be able to notice if somebody transferred something from a device or from their computer to a device or from a device to their computer? Does your malware protection actually look at or scan drives before they detonate or before they open on your computer or execute? How all these would they be communicated to, your security office or your operational team? How would you then say we have an incident? Is this just an event to you? Does this, need to be elevated to incident response? How are you going to do root cause analytics? How are you going to then say this is the path we're going to take? At this point, with everything that we've said, imagine that all this has happened. Do you have multiple threat actors or do you have a single threat actor? How are you tracking things? How are you saying that these events, because they're all separate events, how would you correlate that into a single incident, saying, do we really have a problem here? Is this multiple people coming after us? Is this one person coming after us? Are we collateral damage from a nationwide campaign or just somebody throwing things out there to see what sticks? Or is somebody specifically targeting our organization? Because I can tell you, having sat behind that desk, is to know that you're targeted is a lot different response than if, hey, this is just somebody looking to make some money. They're just throwing this out there to everybody. We think we got it. They're not concentrating on us. When you have somebody directly targeting you and targeting you directly, whether through your supply chain or targeting you, specifically, it needs to change the way that you respond to it. It needs to make sure that you have different areas and start to have a way to start filtering data, a way to start letting upper management know that, hey, we're close to initiating incident response. What can we do? How can we communicate? So let's say that then somebody's out there, maybe the FBI calls you, maybe it's CISA, maybe it's one of the ISACs, or maybe you have your own threat monitoring group, and they go to the dark net and they see that somebody is selling your data. And in that post where somebody's selling your data, they're also joking around or making physical security. Maybe they're saying an active shooter, they'd love to shoot up the place, or they want to hit you with an anthrax attack. Or maybe they want to joke around about, how bad your company is. Number one, do you take the threat seriously? Number two, if you did see the data there, how are you going, maybe it's a sample of the data. How are you going to figure out whether that's actually your data? How are you going to figure out whether that's just something that is widely available on the internet? Is that recent data? Does this breach or does this leak of data look like it's current? Could it be from a year ago, from 5 years ago? How are you going to validate whether this is an actual threat to your organization? And how did it get out there? Especially if you've had no indicators of compromise, you've had no alerts go off, you've had no alarms. Do you have an insider threat? And a lot of the threat actors in this day and age, they're taking screenshots of the data as the sample. So you don't even have any way to manipulate or look at the data. Was this a PDF? Did somebody take a picture of something? Did somebody print out a physical copy of your crown jewels and walk away with it, and then upload it somewhere? Is this a logical issue, a physical issue? Is this somebody that has left the company recently and taken your intellectual property with them? How would you figure out all these things? How do you know where to even start looking if it's your data? And so this is, do you even bring law enforcement in at the time? Through everything that we've talked about now, have you ever thought about law enforcement? Have you ever thought about just giving the FBI or your local law enforcement a heads up on saying, hey, we're seeing some increased activity. We're going to keep you apprised. We don't need any assistance right now, but we just want you to be in the loop. And maybe the FBI might come back and say, hey, it's a good thing you told us that, because we've got 5 or 6 other companies that are in the same industry as you that are saying the same thing. Maybe this is an ecosystem attack. Maybe somebody's targeting everybody in the healthcare sector, everybody in the energy sector, or whatever it might be. How are you going to communicate? How are you going to start asking for additional resources, whether it's intelligence or whether it's analysis? Or do you even start to contact, if you're a regulated facility, do you start looking at regulators? How are you going to communicate to regulators? How are you going to start talking to your insurance companies or third party or managed service providers, cloud services? When do you start to bring all those partners in? You haven't really had an incident yet, maybe, or it depends on when you enact your incident response plan. How do you start communicating as you're building all this together? That's a very big thing that you have to try and decide. So now let's move on to actual triage. This is where you're going to be responding and let's jump all the way to responding and recovering. So now this is where the proverbial hits the fan. So you start getting, IT is being swamped with saying, hey, we've got extreme network degradation. So now you're getting actual tangible things that you can respond to. We like to say that this is where most people start to enact their incident response plan. You have something that you can actually do. Whereas before, if you did some due diligence and you actually investigated, you might be able to stop it before it gets to this point. But now you're into it. Now you're saying, hey, our network speeds are down. Maybe we're being hit with denial of service attack. Maybe something is using up a lot of bandwidth internal to our organization. Maybe somebody has done something to our routing configurations. Have we been hit with ransomware? Do we have an advanced persistent threat in here? What is going on? Do we just have some malware running around? But let's say that it's employees are starting to call your HR department saying, hey, I just got my paycheck and it looks like I have split disbursement turned on, or some of my money is going to a bank account that I didn't authorize, or maybe my salary doesn't look right, or I'm making less money, or heaven forbid they call you and say I made more money, but does HR, once again, is HR have an avenue to talk to you to say, hey, something looks wrong here. We're having a lot of people calling. If 1 or 2 called and said that their payroll wasn't right, that might be, a misconfiguration somewhere. But if it's a lot of people, how do we have an issue? And let's say that your payroll is actually done through a cloud service provider. How are you going to communicate with them to say, hey, we need to see who made these changes? How are you going to communicate getting logs that you need to perform analysis on? Or do you actually have access to those logs all the time? Do you have to contact another company to get access to them? What if it's legitimate? What if you see that Bob is the one making those changes and Bob says, hey, I'm really not doing that? How do you start to figure out what Bob's real traffic is, what he was actually doing versus whether a threat actor was using his username and password to do things? Did that person come in through your network? Does the payroll system, if you're using a cloud service, is there a connection that somebody can make from the outside world to that? How do you start to match up all these different things? How are you going to start doing analysis? And who would do that analysis? Do you have a security team that does it? Is it part of your IT team that does it? Is it a different group? Do you have a contract with insurance to start doing it? And what would it take to enact all of that? So, and the bigger thing is, and this actually happened to several different organizations, is what happens if you miss payroll? What's happened if somehow they got in and you noticed the error before you process payroll? Would you not pay people until you can get the thing fixed? How would you communicate that to your employees? At what point does the morale or the well-being of your employees, or even the legal responsibilities of, hey, we have to pay them by this date or else we're legally liable? How does that affect whether or not you would either pay a ransom or that you would start to look into the situation or get it fixed? Would you look for doing a quick fix just to get them paid? And that might cost you losing any evidence that you had in order to either prosecute or to figure out what really happened. And, or it would at least let the bad guys maybe know that you're onto them and they might start to do something different in the network rather than what they were doing. So how do you factor all those things again versus a quick response versus the right response? And sometimes the quick response is the right response, depending on what your priorities are. And if getting your people paid is the priority because they might not show up to work the next day if they don't get paid, then that is something you need to have a decision on beforehand. So So let's say that now that here's where the ransomware comes in, because this seems to be, the bread and butter these days of the threat actors. Let's say that you had key systems get hit by ransomware. And I have a couple of examples up there, but it's up to you to determine what your key systems are. What systems would hurt you the most? If you're a hospital and your life support systems were hit with ransomware, or your X-ray imager or your MRI machines, does that change the way that you're going to react? If it's your backup files, so now you can't restore from backup, or do you have an offline backup? And I'm going to be honest with you, most organizations say, hey, we have offline backups, but their offline backups really aren't as offline as they think they are. Or the threat actors have gotten good enough that they're, not detonating the ransomware until, a week or 2 weeks later, so that your backups still have the ransomware in there and they can just redetonate if you try and restore from backup. So how are you doing this? And how are you going to start trying to find patient zero so that if you do restore from backup, you can ensure that somebody doesn't have a backdoor in, it's just going to reinfect you all over again? What is the event that would happen that would make you likely to pay the ransom? If the threat actor said that they were going to share your data with everybody in the world because they exfiltrated the data as well as hitting you with ransomware, does that change your decision making? If there's people's lives at risk, if they say, hey, we've hit the safety systems on your manufacturing controls, and so your people are not safe while they do business, would that have you do things? I mean, think about Colonial Pipeline. They kind of shut down because they were, the health and safety systems, they couldn't guarantee what systems were actually online or not online as they were doing this. Who would you notify internally or externally? Would you start notifying your partners that you were having problems? I don't want to pick on Colonial Pipeline because they did a lot of great things during that event, but they were telling everybody it was a network issue when it was really a cyber attack. So they had business partners and stuff that didn't start doing their own incident response capabilities because they thought it was just a network issue. How are you communicating? Who are you communicating to? How are you requesting assistance or help? How are you bringing your insurance in? Once again, how you're dealing with regulators. What are you depending on internally? And I once had a CISO tell me after we were done with an incident that we worked with them on, and they said, if you would have asked me before this incident, what I rated my cyber team as, I would have put our rank up here. My people have this skill set. But he realized that incident response skill set is different. Incident response is being able to configure routers on the fly. It's not having the luxury of looking to Google for an answer on something. You have to know how to do these things. You have to do them quick. Can you do forensics? Can you reconfigure something? Can you set up network paths? All this fun stuff. And can you do it quickly? Because that's what incident response is. And he said, my people are steady state engineers. My people can keep what I have going and operational. They can help me through change management, but they don't do incident response. That's a completely different skill set. So what skills, and you have to be honest with yourself, what skills do you have on hand? What skills do you need from other people? What skills would be beneficial to you? So if you call the FBI or you call CISA or you call your ISAC and you say, hey, I've got these skill sets covered. Can you offer me any of these others? Can you give me forensic capabilities? Can you give me somebody who can help me do network monitoring or network configuration? What do you need? And if you know that ahead of time, it makes the decision making a lot faster while you're going through the event. So now let's say that this report, whatever's going on with you, gets out to the news. The news starts reporting on whatever's happening to you. And not only that, they're actually showing screenshots that could only have come from within your organization. Have you given your people public affairs training? Do they know when to talk to the media, how to talk to the media? Do they know that they're not supposed to share things? How would you discipline somebody? How would you investigate during a time of crisis how that information got out? Are your public affairs people or your external affairs people trained up on cybersecurity incidents? Do they know how to talk to the media? Do they know the right words to say for the insurance or for regulatory talk? Have you had these discussions? How does the leaked images actually impede your ability to do things? Because I tell you, once the media gets wind of it, every business partner you have or every person who's ever done business with you, they're going to be calling you. Are you ready to handle that influx of, communications, having people explain to other people what's going on? Are you ready for, the law enforcement to call you saying, do you need help? Or CISA saying, what do you need? FBI saying, what can we do to help you? You've got to have a way to communicate. If these people aren't already involved with your action plan, how are you going to handle the flow of people requesting information or the number of vendors that are going to suddenly be calling you to say they can solve your problem with the silver bullet that they have? And I'm not saying that vendors aren't an integral part of the incident response platform. They most definitely are. But I'm going to tell you that there's going to be people calling you wanting to sell you something while you're going through an incident. Are you prepared for that? So the most important thing as we run down on time here, I want to talk about is what do you do as the event's concluding? How do you come out of that thing? Most people look at me and the operational team will be like, whew, that cyber event, man, it took us 2 weeks to get over that. And meanwhile, the security team is like, what do you mean get over that? We're still in the middle of it. That ticket's still open. The average incident response ticket is open for between 9 to 12 months. It's not fully remediated. You're not back to business as usual until sometime later. Does everybody in the organization understand that the security team, or sometimes even the operations team, that you've got lessons learned? You've got to put new security controls in place. You might still be hunting down the patient zero. You might be looking for, do we have an advanced persistent threat? Are the bad guys still in the network? You might be looking at, because a lot of times, and this is what I want to really focus on this for just a second. A lot of organizations are worried about recovery time objective and not as much about recovery point objective. But in today's day and age, it's able to say, hey, it's great that we recovered quickly, but is the data that we recovered with, is the backups we used from last night, is that really to the point where we wanted to be? What happens if you were hit at 5 o'clock on a Wednesday, all your data processing or all your accounts payable goes out on Wednesday, but you have to restore from backups from last night? Is all the stuff that you processed from midnight last night till 5 o'clock today, is that data worth losing? Is the recovery point objective more important than the recovery time objective? How do you know that the integrity of your data hasn't been compromised? How are you doing data validation that even after you recover from backups, did the bad guys do something to the data before they hit us with the ransomware? What did they do to our networks so that after we recover, we're as confident as we were before we recovered? When do you get to say that you're back to normal or steady state operations? How do you then go back through and review? Okay, we tried to call Microsoft, but our Microsoft rep, it was no longer Bob, it's now Fred, and we didn't know that. So is somebody going to update all the documentation with Fred's contact information? We no longer use this vendor. We need to take them out of our incident response plan. Or, hey, our SLA with this vendor was, 12 hours and it actually took them 16 hours. How are we going to rectify that? How are we going to plan that in for future events? It took us time to get parts from Dell, or it took us, this much time to re-image machines, or because, Fred was on vacation, we actually had to wait 6 hours for Fred to fly in from wherever he was at in order to assist us, or he could only do things remotely. But since we were hit by ransomware, our remote capabilities weren't working. So Fred, was on vacation, was of no help to us. How do you account for all those things? How do you make your program better as you're going through it? So once again, how would you validate the integrity of the systems brought online? How do you know the threat actor didn't do something to the data? Did he exfiltrate it? Did he change something? Maybe he had a bank account with the bank that got hit and his bank had $10 in it, but he changed it to $1 million, and then he hits you with the ransomware. So you just restore from backup and you're like, ooh, everything's back to normal. But meanwhile, he still made a whole lot of money, almost $1 million, because he changed the numbers in there. How would you know whether somebody, changed the ownership on deeds or whatever it is that your business does? Do you have a way to validate the integrity of the system, that nothing changes were made, or the data itself? How do you bring security up at the same time that you're bringing your operational systems up? Most organizations have a lot more IT people on staff than they have security people on staff. So if the IT team is bringing up systems as fast as they can because you're worried about recovery time objective, but your security team isn't bringing your security stack back up in the same time, maybe you're bringing systems up before there's any security controls around them. How are you going to then monitor whether somebody's attacking the systems as you bring them up online? Do you have a scheduled state of recovery saying, hey, before we bring this system up, here are the security toll gates that have to be achieved before this system goes back live? Because I'm going to tell you, operations teams are probably going to be calling you saying, I need this system up, I need this system up. But you got to say, hey, even though the system's up and ready to go, we need the security controls in place before we give you back access to it. And we need to make sure that the data, once again, the integrity of the data is there before we start letting people input new data into it. Who gets to decide when the incident is closed? That is probably the one that most organizations struggle with. They just look at it and they say, hey, because the operations team is saying, I'm calling this closed, but the security team's like, hey, we still got to buy these 3 other tools to keep this from happening again. We still got to do that. So who gets to decide that you're no longer in incident response mode? Who gets to decide when everything goes back to normal operations, or when a system is considered live again versus just, in investigation? How do you then review what went well, what didn't go well? Do all the stakeholders, media relations, legal, all your operations team, your security team, your CEO, CIO, how are they all coming back to the table to say what worked and what didn't work? How do we hold people accountable? If this was an insider threat or a malicious activity, how would you prosecute? Have you thought about that? Would you prosecute somebody internally? What if it was just the person who leaked the information to the news, which cost you reputation? How would you deal with that internally? Versus, hey, the FBI is saying that, yeah, we can catch the guy that did this to you. Did you save all these logs for us to use as prosecution? Did you work with us so that we can prosecute this person? Did you even want to prosecute it? Because that might keep the incident ticket open even longer, because you might have to keep it open all the way through litigation. So have you thought about what all the toll gates you have to hit are that you can say, I can close this ticket, that I can do this and everything is back to normal? What does steady state operations look like? And how would you determine steady state operations when you have multiple incidents that are all ongoing? Maybe, a ransomware hit you 2 months ago and the team is still dealing with that one, but then you got a denial of service, and now the team's dealing with that one. So how do you close tickets out when it seems that the incidents never stop and that you never know what steady state looks like because something new is always happening? So keep that in mind as well, is that there has to be somebody who can say, this was the path we took. Here's what worked, here's what didn't work, but we're calling this closed and we're moving on to the next incident or preparing for the next incident to happen. So I think that is everything that I had. I know I went through that really fast. I really wish I could go into more detail on a lot of that with you. We would love to have a tabletop exercise with your organization. That's one of the many things we do here at CISA is we are here. I'm going to say this. My name is Klint Walker. I'm from the federal government, and I'm here to help. We are a no-cost service to you to come in and do cyber assessment with your organization. We offer everything from vulnerability scanning to pen testing to resiliency assessments to see where your organization is. But we can do workshops with you and we can do tabletop exercises. So please reach out to your local CSA. You can contact me if you need to know who your local CSA is. I'll be happy to help you. But it's been a privilege to talk to you today. And I hope we have some great questions to move on from here.
Okay, I think they have me back with you. All right, we have many questions. One, Leslie said, NC is still having shocks from the earthquake that occurred in 2020. Would you have imagined? I don't know if that's a question. Elvis said, with the new incident reporting requirements for critical infrastructure sectors, do expect a wider adoption of cybersecurity standards such as NIST?
I tell people all the time that we encourage you to have a standard. From the federal government standpoint, we would like for you to use cybersecurity framework or the NIST 800-53, but having a measuring stick, just pick a standard, NERC CIP, it might be a regulatory standard. It could be ISO 27001, whatever the standard is, pick something to say, this is what I'm supposed to be achieving. And this is what I've actually achieved. Have some way to measure stuff and be honest. Unless regulation is something completely different, but internally be honest with yourself. Do I have a control objective? Do I have a control in place to meet the objective? And then how would I measure whether or not it's actually meeting that objective or not? And then, what do we need to do to do that? Where are my levels of acceptable risk? So where am I willing to accept risk? Where am I willing to mitigate risk? And where am I willing to, just transfer the risk? So what am I going to have to do to ensure operations? And these should be decisions that the organization makes as a whole. It's not a security team decision.
Benjamin said, when you say incident responders, are you able to get into the system and make changes? Is the SME, for example, the network or systems, or is it a SOC analyst with the access to make those changes?
That's a great question. And the answer I'll have to that is this is why incident response planning is so important, is you need to figure out what everybody's skills and capabilities are. Power shifts once you declare an incident. So I'm not telling you CISOs to do this or not, but there was one organization that we worked with where the CISO figured out that if he declared an incident, he didn't have to go through procurement in order to spend money. So he would literally declare an incident at the drop of the hat just so he could spend his budget however he wanted without getting somebody else's approval. But power shifts once you declare an incident. People have the authority to talk to the media directly or maybe to buy things from vendors without going through your normal processes. You have the ability to bypass change control to a certain extent. Incident response is very, very powerful to organizations. Maybe it's your operations teams are the only ones who can make those changes normally, but hey, in a crisis mode, we're going to let our SOC analysts, if they see a problem, they can immediately react to it. Or maybe we have automated controls set up that the system does it itself, through some AI or some other in-face inputs. it really depends on your organization. I'd love to say there's a one size fits all, but there's not. Every organization has to determine for themselves, who do we want to give power to during a time of crisis? And how does that power shift back to the other organization? And then how is there accountability or some way to look at what happened during our incident to make sure that that power was adequate for that person, that they had the right authority, but then also the right accountability during that time of crisis. So can we hold them accountable for what they did, even though they're doing it in a time of crisis, but maybe they had too much power, or they decided to do things that were outside the scope of incident response while they were, doing that. So just keep that in mind. I hope that was a good enough answer.
I'm sure it is. Ben said, how do you decide who should have media training? Surely not everyone in the organization. I'd imagine below a certain level, you only do one thing, and above a certain level, you do another more intense thing.
So it's this. So there's two things. Everybody always lumps these two together, but I want to make sure that everybody understands these are really two different things. There's awareness and there's training. Everybody in your organization needs to be aware that they are not to talk to the media during the crisis, that they are not to disclose any data about what is happening that hasn't been released. So there needs to be an awareness program about media and how to talk to anybody outside the organization, what you're allowed to say outside the walls of your company. But then specific people, and they need to be identified in your incident response plan. These people need training on how to talk to the media. They need to know, hey, if the media calls you, this is what you should say. Or, hey, if we're going to release this documentation to this party in order to do something, like our insurance company needs to see this, but it needs to go through sanitization through this group over here before we release it. Are they trained on that process? What data is releasable? What data is not releasable? We have a lot of organizations that say, hey, our incident response team didn't realize that we were releasing data. Our regulators were trying to help us, but we released data that actually showed some bad things that we were doing, to our regulators, when we could have just released that to the FBI and had the same results. So who are you releasing data to? All of that needs to be as part of your external, media training, or, how you talk to those things. Who's allowed to release data? Who's not allowed? Those people, those positions need to be identified and then trained on specifically your organization's processes and procedures.
So this next question kind of goes hand in hand with what you just said. Steve said, do you recommend creating a manual and training for these PR issues for employees?
I definitely do. I think that it's something that everybody should be trained on. It should be part of your awareness program, just like you have a phishing awareness program, but you also might have a phishing training program. So for certain individuals, you want to have a checklist, or you want to have a process or procedure for how they can talk to the media, or when they're allowed to talk to the media. Like when the city of Atlanta got hit, the media really just surrounded their building, and they actually had security guards that would walk us incident responders. Even though I was with the federal government, they would walk us out to our cars, and they would keep the media from being able to talk to us. So, or they had for VIPs and stuff like that, they had a special, door that, that led outside that the media didn't know about. And so how would you do this if the media is sitting outside your gates, sitting around your building or around your organization? How are you going to protect the people who are coming in and leaving the building from those people that are outside? And how are you going to engage the ones who are supposed to be talking with them on what to say? Your insurance company is probably going to have a lot of information saying, hey, once you say these words, we can't help you anymore. Once you do this, then that is going to make this part of your policy null and void, or it's going to actually enact this part of your policy over here. So you need to make sure that your message is consistent across everybody who's communicating, and that it meets the requirements of any regulatory or any other type of agreements you have with organizations. Because I can tell you what, if you had an MOU or an SLA with a company that you did business with that said, hey, anytime I have a cyber incident, I have 6 hours to notify them, and the first time they hear about it is 7 hours after the event when the news is reporting it, how are you going to hold somebody accountable for, you didn't get this message out to our partner and we had a contract with them to do so. So all of that needs to be very clear with who gets to communicate, when does it get communicated, who's a must, who's a nice to have, and who's allowed to do it, and who's going to be held accountable for it.
Raj says, how do you determine how much cyber insurance you need for your organization?
So cyber insurance is a very tricky topic. I could almost go a whole session on that by itself on, do you need it? Do you not need it? So I think you have to look, that's where you need to look at. So once again, it goes back to risk management. every organization I talk to says, hey, we take a risk management approach to cybersecurity. I find out after I go in and do assessments that no organization is really using risk management. You have to say, here's my risks, here's my threats, here's my threshold, here's where I'm going to accept risk, here's where I'm going to mitigate risk. Your cyber insurance is a transfer of risk. So you have to say, hey, what is my threshold for transference of risk? And how do I match that up with where I'm willing to mitigate and where I'm willing to accept risk? And then how do all these things fit together? So that is a organization by organization. You have to determine that for yourself. If you're an organization, and we just had this conversation with an organization earlier this morning where they were saying, hey, my insurance company says they can put aside money, to have for me to pay for a ransomware event. And we always say, look at them and say, okay, do you want to pay a ransom? And they're like, well, no. And we look at them and say, hey, insurance companies they're looking out for their best interest too. And a lot of times the easiest or the cheapest method for them to get through your incident is to just pay and then walk away from you. So if they're holding that money in reserve, it's real easy for your management to look and say, hey, let's just go ahead and pay them, because that carrot's dangling right there because they think that's the fast and easy solution. These need to be conversations you have ahead of time saying, look, we're going to set the money aside, but we really want that to be a last resort because once again, from the federal government standpoint, please don't ever pay a ransom. But we know that that's a business decision that you have to make based on what the incident is, what data or what your operational impact is, and then how prepared you were or what your backups look like. So you're going to have to find that threshold or that level that works for you. Do you want your insurance company to be just help you with managed services during a time of crisis? Do you want them to actually pay a ransom on your behalf or negotiate on your behalf? What service do you want them to supply? Insurance can be a great thing for organizations. For other organizations, it might be a liability. But definitely, shop around for insurance. Make sure you have their insurance company that's looking out for your best interests as well as theirs and is going to assist you in a time of crisis and is not just looking to make you, somebody that they're making money off of and will look for the easiest way out. Exercise with your insurance company. Bring them to your tabletop exercise. Bring them to your functional exercises and say, how would you help us handle this? It's very eye-opening for most organizations.
Benjamin said, if an organization has the ability to isolate an infected device and the software does not detect, let's say ransomware, and is infected and wormable, would it be advised that a service desk employee initiates isolation on that system, assuming the software-based components are able to?
So in theory, it's a great idea, but once again, everybody operates differently. What does isolation cost you? What if there's a file that you were expecting, or it's the bad guys have infected the file that you actually need for operations, and by you quarantining that or you taking it off, that you're actually inhibiting another process? Are you denial of servicing yourself by taking any of the actions that you're taking? And that's why we always say you have to look at this from an operational standpoint. You have to involve your operations team saying, hey, we would like to say that if this type of stuff comes in, we want to take immediate action. We want to give our SOC analysts or our NOC analysts the ability to do these actions. How does that impact you from an operational standpoint? Then run some live tests on it. Once again, I'm always going to come back to you've got to exercise, whether those be functional tests, whether those be tabletop exercises. You've got to start exercising these things and say, what is our real impact here? Did this work? Did this not work? Do we think our SOC analysts actually have the skills and capabilities to do these things? Or are they going to have too many false positives that then, kind of take up or waste our time or cause operational impacts because of what they're doing? You have to be very careful on how you organize these things. But yes, if you can work all those things out, anytime you can create playbooks or say, hey, we're going to keep an event from happening because we're able to quarantine something or take something off the network or to keep something from executing or, detonating, by all means do it. Those things are great because you're being left of bang rather than right of bang. And so you really need to focus on that. What can you do to stop something from happening is always better than how do we react after it happened. But you need to make sure that it fits with your business model and with the training and skills and capabilities that your personnel actually have.
I did have someone that asked is it possible to get a copy of your slides? Not sure if that's private information.
Kim, feel free to distribute the slides to anybody who'd like them, or if people want to contact me directly, I'm happy to give you a copy of the slides. There's also, I think if you have one industry specific, CISA offers a lot of different tabletop exercises. We don't keep anything that we create close hold. So if you say, hey, Clint, I work for the financial services sector or the maritime sector, and do you have any tabletop exercises geared directly toward our industry? We probably have some templates that we can give over to you. If you'd like us to come and facilitate those exercises, that's great too. You don't have to involve us. We love to be involved, but you can, if you just want to do something and you need the materials to do it, by all means, please let us know what you need and we're going to get that material out to you. We want you to be more secure, whether we're involved with that security or not. So that's the whole goal here, is for everybody to feel safer and to be safer, and then to communicate with each other on what they're doing.
Well, that's awesome. And I want to let the audience know, up in the network lounge, you can see Clint's profile. It does not give you his email address, but if you message him on that, that will pop up in your email. That gets routed to your email. It doesn't give your email. It just sends you the message, or I'm sure they can message you on LinkedIn as well. Unless there's,
I'll put my email address actually in the,
okay, excellent,
the chat there.
and we'll make sure my team will make sure that's out there after, because the show is available on demand until Tuesday in case people have questions for you. We're exactly at time. That was the perfect timing of questions, and I didn't see any other ones come in. So perfect timing. That was excellent. Thank you so much, Clint. We could never have too much of you being on our shows. You're so informative and so great. We're very honored that you spent the last hour with us. So any last words that you want to send out to our viewers?
Just be safe out there. And I can't stress enough, it's all about collaboration. It's all about cooperation. The new, legislation coming out is asking for everybody to share information. Please visit our Operation Shields Up webpage out there so you can find out more about current threats and trends. Work with your local FBI offices. Please contact us here at CISA. There's so much more we can do if we all work together instead of trying to protect our kingdoms by ourselves. So once again, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on. I enjoy these things immensely.